This company built almost everything, and it dominated almost nothing. It built a colossal steam engine for the 1893 World's Fair. It built the turbines that turned falling water into electric light. It built the tractors that turned the American prairie, painted a shade of orange so bold you could see it from a mile away. It built equipment for the atomic bomb. It built the biggest electric generator on the planet. For a stretch of the 20th century, if it was heavy, if it turned, if it burned fuel or made power or broke rock, there was a decent chance Alice Chalmers had a hand in building it. 138 years. From a bankrupt Milwaukee Iron Works to an industrial empire that spanned farm fields, power plants, mines, and factory floors across the entire country. And then, it was gone, sold off in pieces. The proud orange brand handed to a German company, the construction line handed to the Italians, the corporation itself in bankruptcy court by 1987 and legally dissolved by the end of the century. So how does a company that could build anything end up building nothing at all? This is the story of Alice Chalmers, the orange giant, and the one fatal belief that killed it. And it is not the belief you would expect. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what 4 companies became in a single year. In 1901, 4 separate industrial firms merged into one. The Edward P. Alice Company of Milwaukee, a builder of steam engines and milling machinery. Fraser and Chalmers of Chicago, one of the great names in mining and crushing equipment. The Gates Iron Works, and the Dixon Manufacturing Company. Overnight, the combination became one of the largest machinery builders in the United States. And here is the thing about that merger. It did not create a company with one great product. It created a company with a dozen of them. Steam power, mining machinery, flour milling, sawmill gear, pumps, and soon, electrical generators and turbines. From its very first day, Alice Chalmers was built on the idea that breadth was strength, that a company touching every corner of American industry could never be knocked down, because if one market went soft, another would carry it. It was a beautiful theory. The company's main works sat just west of Milwaukee, on a site so large that the community that grew up around it took the company's name and became the city of West Allis, Wisconsin. At its height, tens of thousands of workers passed through those gates. It was not just a factory, it was a company town, an entire local economy resting on the belief that this one enterprise could build anything the nation asked for, and it earned a reputation for engineering that could solve almost any problem you carried through the door. But there was a shadow inside that theory from the beginning. A company that builds everything is, by definition, spread across everything. Its money, its engineers, its factory space, its attention, all of it divided across a dozen fronts. And in every one of those fronts, there was a competitor who did only that one thing, and did it with total focus. Alice Chalmers spent 138 years fighting on every front at once. Remember that, because it is the whole story. But first, you have to see how high the orange giant actually climbed, because the fall means nothing if you don't understand the height. It starts with a bankrupt ironworks and a man who bought it at a sheriff's auction. The Reliance Works in Milwaukee dated back to 1847. By 1861, it had failed financially, and a businessman named Edward P. Alice bought the whole operation at a sheriff's sale. Alice was not a machinist. He was not an engineer. He was a buyer, a builder of businesses, a man who understood that the real value was not in the iron, but in the people who knew how to shape it. He hired the best engineering talent he could find, and he pointed them at the biggest problems in American industry. The smartest thing Edward Alice ever did was hire a man named Edwin Reynolds, an engineer lured away from a rival who became the technical soul of the company. Reynolds was the kind of engineer who did not just improve machines, he built machines that made people stop and stare. And in 1893, at the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, that is exactly what he did. Alice built an enormous Reynolds Corliss steam engine and put it on display at the fair that introduced modern America to itself. Millions of visitors walked past it. Here was a Milwaukee company standing at the center of the industrial world, and the message was unmistakable. Alice could build bigger and better than almost anyone alive. From steam, the company pushed into electricity. As America wired itself for power at the turn of the century, Allis-Chalmers became a major builder of generators and hydroelectric turbines, the giant machines installed at power stations to convert falling water into current. This was the frontier of the age, and the company was on it. But notice what is already happening. Steam engines, mining crushers, milling machinery, pumps, and now electrical generation. The company is not choosing a lane, it is buying every lane on the highway. And the leadership at Allis-Chalmers did not see that as a weakness. They saw it as the entire point. They believed a truly great industrial company should be able to build whatever the nation needed. It was a philosophy that felt like confidence. In time, it would curdle into something closer to arrogance. Because there was one market the company had not yet conquered, the single largest machinery market in America. The one that would come to define the orange giant in the public mind, and the one where its refusal to accept second place would eventually help destroy it. In 1914, Allis-Chalmers introduced its first farm tractor, a machine called the 1018, and that decision changed everything. By the 1960s, Allis-Chalmers was building the machines that lit cities and the machines that split atoms, but it started with a color. In 1929, the company made a marketing decision that would outlive nearly everything else it ever did. It painted its tractors a brilliant shade called Persian orange. The official reasoning was practical. Orange stood out against green fields and brown soil, which made the machines easier to see and, the company argued, safer. But it was also unforgettable. In a market where most tractors were grey or green or red, and Allis-Chalmers was a splash of pure colour rolling across the countryside. Farmers who bought one never forgot it. Their sons never forgot it. That orange became one of the most beloved brand colours in American agriculture, and the company knew how to sell the drama. In 1933, Allis-Chalmers did something no tractor maker had done. It put air-filled rubber tyres on a tractor at a time when everyone else ran steel wheels, and it hired the famous race car driver Barney Oldfield to prove they were fast. Oldfield ran an Allis-Chalmers tractor at more than 60 miles per hour, a farm tractor, doing highway speed. It was a publicity stunt, and it was genius. It told every farmer in America that this orange machine was modern, that it was quick, that it was different. The rubber-tired Model WC that followed became one of the most successful tractors of its era, and the innovation kept coming. The company built the all-crop harvester, a small grain combine that let ordinary farmers harvest their own crops instead of hiring crews. It built the little Model B and the compact Model G for small farms. And in 1961, it built the D19, widely recognized as the first production farm tractor with a turbocharged diesel engine. A turbocharger, the same technology that would later define high-performance cars, bolted onto a machine meant to pull a plow. Allis-Chalmers got there first. So here is a company that is genuinely brilliant, genuinely innovative. First to rubber tyres in the field, first to the turbo diesel tractor. And yet, in the farm equipment market, Allis-Chalmers was never number one. It was usually third, sometimes fourth, behind John Deere, behind International Harvester, always chasing, never leading, no matter how clever its engineering was. And that pattern was repeating everywhere, because while it was building tractors, the Orange Giant was also doing things almost no one associated with a farm brand. When the Second World War came, Allis-Chalmers became one of the nation's major defense manufacturers. It built turbines and electrical equipment for Navy warships. It built pumps and motors that kept factories running across the war economy. And in its most secret work of all, it built equipment for the Manhattan Project. Its electrical expertise was turned toward the enormous electromagnetic machines used to separate uranium at Oak Ridge, the devices that helped produce the material for the atomic bomb. A tractor company, building pieces of the most secret weapon in human history. And it did not stop there. In 1965, Allis-Chalmers built what was then the largest electric generator in the world, a single machine rated at 1,000 megawatts, installed at a power station in Queens, New York. People called it Big Alice, one machine capable of helping power a huge share of New York City. The name itself tells you how the public saw this company: big, capable, building the machines that ran modern life. Walk through the West Alice Works at its peak and you would not have called it a factory. It was closer to a small city that happened to make machines. The foundry threw off heat you could feel from clear across the floor. Cranes the size of locomotives carried turbine shafts overhead. In one building, men poured molten iron for a mining crusher. In the next, they wound copper coils for a generator bound for a power station 1,000 miles away. Further down the line, a row of tractors sat drying in that unmistakable orange. Every trade under one roof, every machine America could ask for, moving toward the loading docks at the same time. It was breathtaking to stand in, and it was also the exact picture of the problem. By any measure, this should have been an unstoppable enterprise. It lit the cities, it armed the nation, it fed the farms, it broke the rock in the mines. So why, at the exact moment it seemed most powerful, was it already dying? Here is the answer, and it is brutal in its simplicity. And that was exactly the problem. Alice Chalmers was competing in electrical power against General Electric and Westinghouse, two companies far larger, focused entirely on electricity. It was competing in farm equipment against John Deere and International Harvester, companies whose entire existence was tractors and implements. It was competing in mining and construction against Caterpillar, a company that thought about nothing but earth moving. On every single front, Alice Chalmers faced a specialist. And a specialist, over time, almost always beats a generalist. The specialist pours all of its money into one market, all of its best engineers, all of its factory investment, all of its dealer network. Meanwhile, the generalist splits everything a dozen ways. For decades, the breadth had hidden the weakness. A bad year in tractors was covered by a good year in power generation. A soft mining market was carried by strong pump sales. The company could always point to some division that was doing well and tell itself the strategy was working. But underneath, in market after market, the orange giant was slowly being outfocused. It was spending enough to compete everywhere and never enough to win anywhere. And then came a blow to the reputation that money could not paper over. In the early 1960s, Alice Chalmers was caught up in one of the largest antitrust scandals in American industrial history, a price-fixing conspiracy in the electrical equipment business alongside General Electric and Westinghouse. Executives across the industry went to prison. It was a national scandal, and it landed the company on the front pages for all the wrong reasons. Most of the story of quiet decline was never really recorded anywhere. It did not happen in a single dramatic crash. It happened one market at a time, one lost contract at a time, 1 year of underinvestment at a time. And if you want to keep the memory of the America that actually built things alive, the companies, the workers, the machines that made this country, we are gathering these stories, the ones we tell here and the ones you share in the comments, into a book meant to sit on a shelf and be passed down. Check the link in the description to reserve your copy. Now, back to Milwaukee. Through the 1970s, the pressure became impossible to hide. Alice Chalmers folded its construction equipment business into a joint venture with Fiat of Italy in 1974, creating Fiat Alice. It was a sign of the times. The company could no longer afford to fight the earth-moving war alone against Caterpillar, so it brought in a partner to share the burden. Piece by piece, the empire that once did everything itself was starting to lean on others just to stay in the game, and the debt was mounting. To compete on so many fronts at once, Alice Chalmers had borrowed heavily for years. As long as sales stayed strong, the borrowing looked manageable. But borrowing is only survivable if the good years keep coming. And in the 1980s, for American agriculture, the good years stopped cold. The 1980s farm crisis hit rural America like a hammer. Land values collapsed. Farmers who had borrowed to expand suddenly could not make their payments. Farms failed by the thousands. And when the farmers stopped buying tractors, the tractor makers bled. Even John Deere, the strongest of them all, suffered badly. For a chronically weak number 3 like Alice Chalmers, already carrying too much debt and spread too thin, it was fatal. The losses piled up. The Orange Giant, the company that had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and a century of competition, was running out of time. And the men in charge finally had to admit the thing their predecessors never would. They could not win every market. They could not even hold the market that had made them famous. In 1985, Alice Chalmers sold its farm equipment division, not to an American buyer, to Klockner Humboldt Deutz, a German company. The Persian orange tractors, that unforgettable color, the machines that generations of American farmers had loved, now belonged to a firm in West Germany. The brand was rechristened Deutz Alice. A few years later, in 1990, that business was bought out by its own managers and became a new American company called AGCO, taking its name in part from Alice. The orange lived on, but the giant that created it did not own it anymore. The rest of the empire came apart the same way. Fiat took full control of the construction line. The pump business and the other pieces that had once made this an all-purpose industrial powerhouse were sold off to whoever would buy them. Product lines were shut down. In 1987, the Alice Chalmers Corporation filed for bankruptcy protection. The company that had stood at the center of the 1893 World's Fair, that had built equipment for the atomic bomb, that had raised the biggest generator on Earth, was in a courtroom being taken apart. And by 1999, it was fully, legally gone. 138 years. Ended. Here is what I find genuinely painful about this story. Alice Chalmers was not destroyed by a lack of talent. The engineers who built the first turbo diesel tractor, who built Big Alice, who built machines for the Manhattan Project, were as good as any in the country. The company was not killed by bad products. Its tractors were beloved. Its generators powered cities. It was killed by a belief. The belief that a great company should be able to build everything, that breadth was safety, that being present in every market was the same as being strong. It was a belief that felt like confidence and hardened into arrogance. For 100 years, Alice Chalmers refused to do the one thing that might have saved it. It refused to choose. It refused to walk away from the markets it could not win and pour everything into the one or two it might have owned. Its competitors chose. Deere chose farms, Caterpillar chose earth, General Electric chose power. And one by one, the companies that chose beat the company that would not. That is the whole tragedy in a sentence. Alice Chalmers wanted to be everything to everyone, and in the end it became nothing to anyone. The name Persian orange still means something to the people who grew up on those tractors. There are collectors today who restore them, who repaint that unmistakable color, who fire up an old Model WC or a D19 at a county fair and let the crowd hear it run. The city of West Alice is still there, still carrying the company's name, long after the company itself vanished. Close your eyes for a second. Picture the factory floor at its peak, the heat of the foundry, the orange paint drying on a fresh row of tractors, the overhead cranes swinging a generator shaft the size of a house, tens of thousands of workers moving through a plant that built pieces of nearly everything America ran on. A company so confident it believed it could never be beaten because it was everywhere at once. Open your eyes. The floor is quiet. The orange belongs to someone else. The generators carry other names. The men who could build anything are gone, and what killed them was not any single machine. It was the refusal, right to the very end, to ever pick just one. Alice Chalmers did not fail because it could not build. It failed because it could not choose. And that may be the most American industrial tragedy of them all, a giant that mistook doing everything for doing anything truly well. If your family ran an Alice Chalmers tractor, if you worked at West Alice, or if you grew up hearing about the orange machines that ploughed your grandfather's fields, drop a comment and tell me which model and which farm. We are building the largest archive of American industrial history on this channel, and the workers who built the orange giant deserve to be remembered properly. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you, and give this video a like to help someone else discover the story. I'll see you on the next one.